Hey, Outlaw Nation fans, welcome to another review episode here on the Outlaw Nation. And I'm incredibly excited to welcome to this review my friend and co host of the Jedi Way, Laura Kelly. How are you?
Doing well this morning, John. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm not doing a British accent. I'm going to really try really hard not to do this as we do our spoiler review of The Crown season 4 episodes 1 through 5, just 1 through 5. But Laura, first I want to start because I haven't reviewed The Crown on the channel before yet, so this is my first review of it. I want to ask, what's your experience with The Crown? Why are you such a massive fan of The Crown?
Well, you know what drew me in the first place? I was trying to think of this the other day, and then I remembered because it's super on brand for me. Because you know how I have sort of expensive taste. I remember reading that this was like the most expensive show that Netflix
Oh,
had ever made at the time,
yeah,
in terms of the production. So I was really excited to see that. I love a good production design. I'm a sucker for period pieces. So this had a couple things that appealed to me, and
yeah.
I've been pretty hooked ever since the beginning. The first couple seasons were really good.
Mhm.
I was very weary of the idea of recasting all the characters because I felt like very connected to the first
Yeah,
two seasons. But I've really enjoyed this new cast. I mean, Helena Bonham Carter has been amazing as Princess Margaret.
yeah.
In the first 5 episodes that we've seen this season, there hasn't been a ton of focus on her,
Right,
which I suppose is fair. There's been a lot of focus on Margaret in past seasons, but
right.
so far I've really enjoyed this season.
As someone who followed the Royals for quite some time and was a huge Princess Diana fan, this season is the season I have been waiting for through all the first 3 seasons to get to Diana. And this season, they deal with Diana straight up. Emma Corrin stepping in to play Diana. I was skeptical. I was very skeptical. I'm like, who can really encapsulate Princess Diana so well? And I think Emma Corrin did a fantastic job, and not to be outdone by another new cast member in Gillian Anderson stepping in to do Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who, of course, Meryl Streep had done in The Iron Lady. You see this situation with two of these incredibly powerful characters coming in to the fray of season 4. And as you mentioned, Laura, we had the recast in season 3. They all kind of figured out their rhythms of these characters through the season. And then now walking into season 4, these two women come in to kind of upset the apple cart in different ways here throughout the season. So episodes 1 through 5, just before we start, just want to say these are spoilers. So if you haven't watched the episodes, stop right now, go and watch the episodes, come back and listen or watch our review. Laura, so let's start with the first episode, Gold Stick. Peter Morgan, who was the creator of the show, a playwright, he got a lot of guff last season for not focusing more on the troubles, the stuff that was happening in Northern Ireland between England and the occupation there in Northern Ireland, and they address it right off the bat in the first episode in a very tragic way with Lord Mountbatten, aka Charles Dance, dying in a terrorist bombing. This actually happened. This did happen. And members of his family, including his two grandchildren, were killed in this bombing along with himself. We get a letter that's written to Charles to tell him to find a woman that is, kind of sweet and good natured, and the people will fall in love with her as their princess, kind of setting the stage for this courtship of Diana. And we do see Diana in this episode as well as kind of a wood nymph, Midsummer Night's Dream type thing. So what was your feeling about all of this episode? What was your feeling about how they portrayed everything that was happening here with these characters?
Well, I've been very impressed with the actress playing Princess Diana so far.
Mm.
I very much enjoyed her portrayal. I remember seeing the picture of her and just being so surprised at how young she was
Yes.
and how young she looked. But yeah, I didn't realize that that Diana. I mean, she would have married Charles when she was or gotten engaged around age 18.
18. Yeah, she was 19 when they got married. They had, yeah, and got engaged in the same kind of time frame. They met when she was 16,
Yeah.
and he was 29. So yeah.
Oh my. Yeah, but so I was really surprised just how young she looked because I sort of had this impression of Diana. For me, she's kind of always been up on a pedestal. My mom was like really, or is still to this day probably, was very much I think following
Mm.
sort of the drama and everything of what was going on with Diana from the time that she got engaged to Charles
Hmm.
until her death. And so that she's always kind of been in the wings, I think, a little bit in my life. Funny enough, my mom's name is also Diane. My mom's name is Diane, and so she, like, what I remember, like, hearing in the show the different side characters, like Diana's friends, like, referring to her as Di, and I'm like looking up, like, looking for my mom. It's just, not something I hear very often, but I'm enjoying this season very much. I love that they sort of opened with the IRA. That they added that historical context this season. That's been really interesting. They haven't gone too much farther outside of episode 1. With that, we haven't revisited it too much, and I'm kind of, you're farther ahead in the show than I am, so maybe you know what's coming, but I would be curious to see more. And then the introduction of Margaret Thatcher. I'm a fairly big Gillian Anderson fan. I was very excited about the idea of her being cast in this role. And I won't, I'm not going to kid you. I did actually, like, I've sat in my bedroom and tried to, like, imitate that voice, because I'm just like, how is she doing that? And there's just no way, like, that she's in her own world doing that. But she's killing it, and I'm really enjoying the portrayal. I'm learning a lot. I'm not a big history nerd, so I'm enjoying this, everything that I'm learning from this season. And I gotta say, the way that they built up that suspension to Dickie's death in Ireland was really, you just kind of felt it coming. I was like, I feel icky, and I don't know why. And I think they did a really good job of building up to that. I mean, as somebody who really didn't see what was coming at all, it was exciting to watch.
The vibe of the hunting, right? I mean, Prince Charles is ice fishing in Iceland, and Prince Philip are hunting down a stag, and then you see basically the IRA, because you see those guys roll up in their car to watch from the binoculars to make sure that the bombing happens. So creatures are being hunted essentially in this sequence, and you're right, and it builds up this idea. And of course, this is also, as you said, the introduction of Thatcher, but also, as I mentioned here, the introduction of Diana, who will be hunted by the paparazzi as well. So a lot of groundwork is laid in this first episode, and just a little bit of historical stuff. Mountbatten did not write that letter to Charles the night before the day before he died. He had written letters like this to Charles in the past. So Peter Morgan taking a little bit of creative license here. And Mountbatten actually survived the bombing for a little while. He got dragged to shore from the bombing. Both of his legs were blown off. He got dragged to the shore from the bombing, but then died from his injuries before the ambulance could get there to try to save him. So these are the things that legitimately happened. Of course, these are all juxtaposed to the Queen doing her ceremony there. So this idea of a separation, right? Constant separation. The royals going through their ceremonies with the regalness and the outfits and all everything, and her gold stick by her side, which is why the episode is named that, juxtaposed to people like the IRA, who are upset about the occupation, and then people like who are going to be suffering unemployment with Thatcher coming in. So there is this, like, division constantly between the haves and the have-nots that becomes very a running theme again throughout the season. Did you like the way they introduced Diana? Is it because in reality Diana's introduced? They're at a party, and it's her sister, who is of course dating Charles at the time, who introduces Diana to Charles. Sarah Spencer, they eventually do not go forward, because Sarah gives an interview in the paper where she says, I'd rather that whether he was a footman or King of England, I wouldn't marry Charles. And it was like, that was pretty much the end of the relationship. But she had introduced them when she was 16, when Diana was 16 and Charles was 29. So did you like that manic pixie dream girl thing, a way of introducing her?
I did. And, it kind of reminded me a little bit of the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet movie.
Yes.
It just seemed to be laced with that sort of theme, which I very much appreciated. I enjoyed it. I thought it seemed very on brand for how to introduce that character. I mean, like, it was down to, like, the voice and the sort of bounding around the room and the costume. All of it just seemed to fit really, really well with where they were in the story. I did find that interesting, though, that by the end of the episode that Sarah, regardless of how she felt about Charles, and, who knows if this is historically accurate or not, but still seemed to be, trying to deter him from Diana, really just out of spite and probably jealousy of her sister. But yeah, I would be curious to maybe read up a little bit on that myself. But it was, I enjoyed the portrayal. I enjoyed her introduction very well. I think she looks great. The hair is on par for everyone in this season. Margaret Thatcher is literally defying gravity with what's happening up there. But Diana seems to be pretty on point too. So I've been very impressed with it.
Yeah, and just to let you guys know a little bit of historical accuracy here, but Diana and Sarah's parents, John Spencer and Frances Spencer, were the Viscount and Viscountess Althorpe. They had a close connection to the royal family. They had been raised on the Queen's Sandringham estate in Park House. So they had connect. Yes, Diana was a normal person in that she was, not a royal. She was a part-time school teacher. She was even a house cleaner for her own sister and the flat that they were sharing with other people. So she kind of had these odd jobs that she was doing at a young age in her life. So in that sense, she was normal, but she wasn't normal like, let's say, like someone who's like Margaret Thatcher was normal, like she was a shopkeeper's daughter. And so there's a difference there. Certainly those connections there with that. Also, I want to get your thoughts on this. Thatcher and the Queen meet. And of course, Prince Philip does his misogynistic moments saying, oh, just we need two women running the country, that kind of thing. Of course, the Queen pushes back on that. And then the Queen meets Thatcher and plays this little game of picking out who her cabinet is. Once again, this like real stark difference between the haves and haves not, the difference between serious and playful, and you can be playful when you have everything, that kind of stuff come through. But then also the difference here talking about women, where it's Margaret Thatcher who's saying she thinks no women should be in power because they're too emotional. Were you surprised by this exchange?
If I had more historical knowledge of what Margaret Thatcher was like, I probably wouldn't have been surprised by that, but I was surprised to hear that come out of her mouth. I do think it was interesting, and I'm not sure if I totally read it right, but at one point, Queen Elizabeth, I think, compares Thatcher to Philip when they're talking.
Yes.
And he describes her as dangerously opinionated, and she's like, well, who does that sound like? I do. I read a little bit into that, where I actually kind of like that comparison, because number one, it makes sense. Yeah. And number two, they had such a, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip have such a long relationship, but then Margaret Thatcher and the Queen had a very long relationship too. Thatcher's tenure was very long. Yeah. In place as prime minister. So I like that comparison.
She was the longest serving prime minister of the 20th century, and still the only woman to be prime minister of the UK until Theresa May came in, of course, last year, I believe. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, well, we can't get past Margaret Thatcher's introduction without addressing her awkwardly deep bow. Yeah. Your Majesty. It was
almost making fun of her. Almost.
Oh, it was so over the top, and that was really just kind of our brief introduction of the uncomfortableness that we're gonna feel with some of the Margaret Thatcher stuff in this series, because episode 2 really dives in deep to some of that stuff. But I did enjoy it. I'm really enjoying Gillian Anderson's portrayal. But yeah, the Queen's reaction to that sort of how long are you going to stay down there? It was so enjoyable. So I've really enjoyed episode 1 the couple times that I've watched it. It's a fun one.
It's for sure. And we roll into episode 2, as you just mentioned here, the Balmoral test. This is both women, Margaret Thatcher and Princess Diana, going to Balmoral to pass a test, basically, in different ways, both of them there. And Margaret Thatcher being the most awkward one, showing up, not having shoes for being outside, showing up there and, fully wearing her nice clothes, crashes in on what she thinks is dinner at 6 p.m. But in fact, it's just hanging out and chatting. And then dinner is much later. They adjust dinner. Then they play this game, Ibble Dibble, which really, once again, this idea of the royals playing while some of the country is suffering, this kind of juxtaposition again, and seeing Margaret Thatcher, who's obviously a way more serious person and takes herself more seriously and thinks the business of state is more serious than spending time with these royals, where initially she felt she might have a connection with Elizabeth as a woman in a man's world. It quickly goes away during these scenes here in this episode, as she realizes that they are the elite, and at the same time, older members of her conservative party are betraying her in interviews on television about her policies, that she's moving too fast, that she's not going the conservative route by taking it slow and enacting these things. She's moving too fast. And that kind of what we see from the episode is that gives her the even more resolve to let those people go after her experience with the upper elite here with the Queen and the royal family. What do you think about everything involved here with Thatcher in this episode as she dealt with being at Balmoral?
Oh, fully cringeworthy. It was, but in a good way.
Right.
It was fun. It's fun to see the royals play with their food a little bit. Unfortunately with the Thatchers, unfortunately for them, it was sort of interesting to see how our Margaret Thatcher's husband, it all just kind of rolls off of him. Mm-hmm. He's so laid back and just doesn't really seem to care. And it's really kind of refreshing to see. Like, I do love watching their relationship because they seem like such opposites. But yeah, it was fully cringeworthy. The fact that nobody told her to, like, how to pack properly, what to bring, when to show up for certain things, even if it's written this way, it's really an unwritten rule that you should show up this way. But there was nobody to really coach her through any of this. And the event planner in me was just like, oh my God, I was just cringing the entire time. I was feeling for this woman. Who was in just this most awkward position. But I really do like that we spent a good chunk of our time in the first half of this season in Balmoral, in Scotland, because this was very much like a different sort of point of view that we haven't gotten much of with the royals, where they're not just sitting high and mighty in Buckingham Palace or in Windsor. They have they're kind of they're crawling in the mud and stalking deer. And it was a really fun, interesting side to see. Reminded me a little bit of some of that we get when in Downton Abbey, when the family goes to the Highlands and they are participating in some of the same activities. It was kind of fun to get to see the other side of how they live. It's not all glitz and glamour. There's a whole nother side where they're just like, let's go crawl through the mud just for fun.
The Queen is always, if you watch the first 3 seasons, of course, you do your study. She has had to navigate quite a lot of attempts at her, or criticisms at her ruling or at her being the Queen, and had to navigate situations. So she's a tough bird. And showing her out there, in the boots with the coat and riding the horse and stomping through the Scottish area, the castle there, that's the vibe. And if you saw the Queen with Helen Mirren, that was also that vibe as well, of her stomping through something they enjoy doing, hunting. They're outdoorsy people for sure. And then we switch over to Diana. Diana shows up and absolutely, for lack of a better term, slays them with her approach to things. She comes in. Prince Philip immediately takes a liking to her. They go out to kill that stag that had been injured, I think, earlier in the episode or in the previous episode. They go out to kill that stag. And she's the one that tells Prince which way the wind is blowing. She's the one that kind of helps him line it up. And then she's the one when they kill the stag. So something she gets solidified there. The Queen enjoys her. And of Charles, it almost feels like they're saying Charles was essentially shoved into this courtship because she was so perfect. And and no one had ever passed the Balmoral test with such flying colors. What do you think about everything that happened with Diana in this episode here at Balmoral?
I thought it was really interesting, and it was certainly educational. And, I think one of the things that this episode did really well, and we got a little bit of it in the previous episode with some of the Diana scenes, is that it takes the pause. It's willing to just pause and take the quiet moment and let the clock run a little bit. And I really enjoy those quiet moments. And so we got a lot of those sort of built in just to the concept of going stalking when they're out hunting for the deer. But there's a little, even just with Charles and Diana at the very end of the last episode, where she's talking to him, he's in the car, and then there are cars honking behind him trying to get him to go. And it's like, give them a moment. They're having a cute moment. But it's interesting because this is kind of, we see just in the first half of this season, this is kind of the one time I feel like everyone's on Diana's side. Yeah. Because it seems to go very south very quickly with the relationship. And we're jumping around to different times. The timeline goes very quickly in the first 5 episodes. I think we're spanning at least a couple of years. And but I think that just these quiet moments that they took in this episode, where we kind of get to really see how they see Diana and how she's taking it in, but still sort of maintaining herself, which I really appreciate. I think that there was a lot that I learned about Diana in this. I think, like like I said, I always kind of had her on this kind of pedestal, and I never really thought of her as this sort of like mischievous, conniving, even. That seems like an extreme word, but it does come off a little bit that way. Like she's a little bit calculating, which I appreciate. You can tell she's smart, which I very much appreciate, and it was really fun to watch and made her a lot more interesting to me just as a person.
Well, also the symbolism that she can tell which way the wind blows. Like there's a little bit of symbolism there. Of course, Diana being one step ahead of the royals with all this stuff as she comes into her own, which will be, I'm sure, explored more in season 5 as she starts to understand her power in the public eye and what she can do to kind of, control the narrative about herself and her battles and clashes with the royals there. And of course, there's mentions of Camilla. We're getting into the Camilla stuff. There's mentions of the Camilla stuff in episode 1, a little bit of mentions of it in episode 2. Charles calls Camilla and they have the conversation. By the way, full disclosure, absolutely hate Charles and Camilla for what they did to Diana. I'm gonna just put it all on the table. If you were watching this with me, and my girlfriend can attest to this, I would yell at the screen every once in a while. You dirty, evil people, for what you're about to do to this poor young woman. But it's so well done. Emerald Fennell plays Camilla Parker Bowles. By the way, I think if I'm correct on this, she was the showrunner for Killing Eve season 2. It's a pretty impressive resume this young actress has already with what she's doing, how she's establishing herself in the world here now. But yeah, her and Charles having these conversations. So it's never far away. Camilla is never far away from this relationship with Diana. And although she does push Charles into the relationship, she's also jealous of the fact that Charles is in this relationship. So really uncomfortable moments to be watching.
Yeah, I think she sort of viewed Diana as this like fragile, innocent little bird. Yeah. And she was ready to just like, hey, if I can get this like really easy mark into this marriage, I can still take advantage of everything that I want out of the situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think she learns when they go to lunch, I think in episode 3, that she may have underestimated her a little bit. Which was enjoyable to see. Yeah. But I'm just picturing really quickly you like yelling at the TV like you're watching a football game, but it's just a crown.
It's terrible. It's a terrible habit of mine, but I do it. I try to keep it chill, but I do have my moments where I will yell at the television at people who are playing these characters overall. And then, of course, the Diana moment there as well. What do you think about that? The end moment of Diana walking down the street with the cameras going at her. Sorry, I should have been more specific. And then that little smirk that goes on her face as we go to black. Did you like that moment?
Yeah, see, and that's what I'm talking about. We think that Diana is like this sort of like angelic, like innocent thing, and I maybe she is to some extent, but I do maybe in real life she was, I should say. Mm-hmm. But I love this portrayal of her showing a sort of different side, leaning into it a little bit, at least in these early days. I imagine we're going to see this her relationship with the paparazzi evolve at some point, but these early days of it, I really did enjoy it. It gave me a little bit of a thrill to see that. Yeah. But I also was like appalled. I'm just like, why does she not have a security guard or something with her? I'm just like, I didn't realize it was so different back in that time that she isn't like I mean, like imagine Ariana Grande walking down the street without a security guard. I mean, it was like, it's just insane to me that there wasn't better security, but I mean, that's a very early warning sign of what we're going to see in the rest of this season. Yeah. Yeah. And also the little smile, it shows you that she's going to eventually understand how to use that down the road, but it's her way of like enjoying it for now, getting the attention. And you're right, but her not having a security guard or anything like that, it just speaks volumes to how the royals like kind of let her be and didn't understand this explosion of tabloid journalism that was to come through the 80s and 90s. So certainly, once again, them being a step behind, understanding what's happening in the pop culture. Let's move on to episode 3, Laura, here, Fairy Tale. This one, we really dive into this relationship between Prince Charles and Lady Diana. And Diana, of course, having that infamous lunch with Camilla Parker Bowles, which totally happened. That lunch absolutely happened. Then we hear about this bracelet that has the initials of their pet names for each other, Camilla and Charles. Diana finds out about this bracelet. Diana did find out about this bracelet. Wasn't quite around the same time, but did. Camilla and Charles were not necessarily doing anything during the situation, but it is implied that his heart
is still with Camilla throughout this whole thing, leaves her alone. Diana has to learn how from her, as a grandmother, her grandmother, I think, has to learn how to be a lady, how to carry herself, how to present herself as a future queen, but certainly a princess, or a future princess for sure, but possibly a future queen. So all of this she gets schooled on. How did you feel about this episode as Charles kind of leaves her alone in the castle and goes off on a 6-week trip?
Well, yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit, that's definitely foreshadowing, I think, of what their relationship is going to be. But
true.
I mean, it really is. First of all, there's at one point she wears I think it's the very beginning of the episode when they're announcing the engagement. She's wearing this blue suit that is just so perfect and so beautiful. I mean, it was a fantastic look on her. She looks great in blue. But I have to say that, like, the bulimia thing, I really do like that they're bringing that into the conversation, and they're making it, real and putting it out there, and, making sure that people know that this is part of this, this poor woman's history. I'm glad that they didn't shy away from that. I think they could have easily swept it under the rug. There are lots of other storylines that we could have put into the forefront, but I'm glad that they included that. As hard as it is to watch. The Fred and Gladys thing is, ooh, that hurts, because I think, like, regardless of how their marriage ended, Charles and they had this great flirtation in episode 1. They had this, these really kind of, it just worked. It worked, and it felt really right. And it's so sad how quickly it went down. And Camilla's a big part of that, unfortunately. And it was so sad to watch the way that this lunch played out. I do like that Diana sort of held her own a little bit. But it was really tragic to watch the sort of realizations happen in that scene in real time.
Well, and also because she's young, right? Camilla takes advantage of that and starts to ask her, well, oh, you're not an outdoors person. And then so in her mind, she's like, okay, these are the times I can go and meet up with Charles. I can go and, do my things with behind Diana's back. Like, the active participation of Camilla Parker Bowles in this betrayal of Diana in this marriage cannot be, overstressed, in my opinion. Charles and Camilla both deserve incredible amounts of blame for what they did to Diana here. And in the course of the episode, we see that it's this lunch that leads to Diana's bulimia. That leads to the first way of her reacting so strongly to what is happening here in her world and how to deal with it. Remember, she's 19, for God's sakes, and so she's thrust into this world that she has no concept of, or has an idea of, but no concept of how massive it actually is. We do have time with her and her girlfriends celebrating, and they're excited and what it's all going to mean, because this is also the engagement when he asked. And he did ask her, didn't get on one knee, just asked her there I think it was in the nursery or the library. Somebody just asked her, do you want to get married? Yeah, sure. There was no romance to it at all. And so from the beginning, as you mentioned earlier, Laura, the red flags are there throughout this relationship. But this lunch is so epic. And and this is where you really love the writing of the show. So much is going on below the surface in their interactions and in the looks that they're given. And I was watching a behind the scenes thing on this scene, and Peter Morgan had Josh O'Connor, who plays Prince Charles, on the set at the table. So when they're shooting their scenes, each one has their hand on one of his knees. So it adds even more of an element of fighting over Charles there in the scene. So just some brilliant work by the director of this episode, making that, giving some more context to what this lunch is really all about, which is Charles.
I love that little behind the scenes tidbit. That's a really cool insight. It's weird to think about in the times of COVID. I'm just like, oh my God, they were that close to him. But that's really cool. I like that a lot. I will say that the wedding rehearsal that follows shortly after, I do like that was a fairly quick transition into that. Again, it was just how uncomfortable it was. I'm like, we are really seeing like the behind the scenes of a fairy tale in action. And it was, regardless of how historically accurate it is, there's definitely some truth to it. And I just felt for this poor girl, for Diana, like in this, can you imagine being in this grand chapel in this very grand moment and having it feel like this, having to like confront the, this member of the royal family about an illicit relationship is just, just heartbreaking. It's so
Right.
heartbreaking and so uncomfortable and cringy.
And he tries to allay her fears by giving her that ring that is the crest there to try to say, like, this is something special I'm giving to you, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, it's to keep that thing going. And Diana tries to get an audience with the queen to maybe call off the marriage, but the queen won't take her call. The queen kind of ignores her. She's constantly trying to get in touch to try to make these confrontations happen with the queen to talk to her. But the queen is kind of like putting up a wall between them now, which is very, very interesting. And it'll be something we talk about in just a second as well. Coming out of this, though, you got to give a lot of credit to Emma Corrin, as she's just such a great job throughout these first 3 episodes of establishing Diana's overwhelmed nature of it all, but also you start to see slowly the pieces of steel starting to construct in her spine of what she needs to do to navigate this situation. And especially in the church, the way she calls out Charles in that church and has that confrontation, that is her like, you don't do this to me. What is happening? Blah, blah, blah. Like calling him out, you know, and putting him on the spot. So we see that there's glimpses of a possibility that this relationship could have worked. It could have worked out. It could have been the fairy tale. But you're right. Just like what people talk about in romantic comedies, what happens after the movie's over? What really happens in this relationship after the movie is over, the real thing. I mean, think about Laura Kelly at 19 versus Laura Kelly at 32. How do you navigate a situation like this? It must be.
I know. Can you imagine being right out of high school and having to try to figure this? I mean, I can't imagine. I remember my idiot self wandering around my like college campus, my first day. I'm just like, I can't imagine having to deal with what she's having to deal with. But it was interesting to see Margaret's reaction to this whole thing.
Yes.
I mean, that was great. Yeah. The fact that, you know, they really, as much as we kind of got to see them sort of stepping off to the side, Charles and Diana, they were trying to make an effort, it seemed, while they were in front of the family to sort of keep their composure, and not make it quite as awkward as they certainly felt. But Margaret saw right through it. Yep. And I love that she called it out when they were, you know, I think they were just having drinks or something right after the rehearsal. But she's just like, here they are, they're doing it again, and nothing has changed, and you're forcing another member of this family to marry someone they do not want to marry, that's not right for them. And I love that we have this sort of moment, this kind of softer moment with Margaret where she doesn't want to see another member of her family go through it. And she really does try to put a stop to it. And then we have the Queen Mother step in and say, that's how it works. That's how it's always worked. And that's how it's going to keep going.
And this moment with Charles, and when he says, when he's being asked by a reporter about them being in love, he says, whatever that means. Yes, we're in love, whatever that means. That really actually happened. You can go and find the interview. He does say that. You see Diana kind of smile and brush it off. But what a moment, because later, of course, she is incredibly frustrated by that response, right? And it clearly betrays the fact that he was never in love with her for real.
Yeah. And we get the moment of Queen Elizabeth confronting Charles about it right at the very end. And you kind of, in this moment, you know, where everything has sort of been built up against him in this episode because he is being a piece of shit. But we do have this little moment where, like, I felt sorry for him a little bit. Like, you know, she tells him that he has to do his duty. And if he does it and he does it right, then happiness will follow, and then you'll be in love, and it'll all be a fairy tale after that. And it's another one of those just sort of quiet moments at the end of this episode that was just so sad. So I did have just the tiniest little bit of sympathy for him at the end, because he wasn't in an easy position either.
True. All right, let's move on to episode 4, Laura. It's favorites. This is maybe one of the funniest ones of the season, and maybe of the entire run of The Crown. This idea that the Queen is trying to figure out who her favorite child is, because it becomes very clear because Margaret Thatcher's child Mark gets lost as he tries to do this race, and she spends the majority of the episode trying to find him, and is completely just out of sorts, cries in front of the Queen. And then the Queen, having a conversation with Philip, talks about the fact that Thatcher admits that her favorite son is Mark, and the Queen was like, can you have favorites as a parent? And Prince Philip says, yeah, mine is Anne, without even missing a beat. And the Queen can't even say who her favorite is in the moment. And Prince Philip says, we all know who your favorite is. and won't tell her in a fun little bit of teasing. So now she, in like kind of a sitcom a setup, has to meet with each of her children, and we get introduced to Prince Edward, Prince Andrew, who's been strangely kind of in the background, and of course conversations with Anne and Charles. So what did you think about this whole setup and these conversations and these scenes between these family members on the show?
I mean, the setup with Margaret Thatcher in audience with the Queen was just insane to me.
Yeah.
The fact that she started crying, and then we get the line from I'm just going to call her Liz. Queen Elizabeth is too much. We get the line from Liz that Margaret Thatcher's not the first prime minister to cry in front of her. I'm just like, can you imagine one of these like old white dudes crying in front of Queen Elizabeth? That's just it's out of control. Yeah. But yeah, the conversation of the favorite child. There are 4 kids in my family too, and I'm just like, we all know who the favorite is, and it shifts. It definitely shifts. It depends what's happening in the world. Yeah. But for a lot, it's at the same time, there's also, I think, kind of a consistent one for every family. But there was a great little moment with when they're having that conversation where Queen Elizabeth is just like, Philip, the way that she like squeaks it out. So it's such a high pitched, forceful thing that she's so shocked that he would just come out and say that his favorite is Anne. It just cracks me up. But, you kind of see hints of that in previous episodes when they're at Balmoral and they're talking. But yeah, there's been a lot of history that's been happening with Anne, because now we've jumped 3 years into the future from, I think, where we left off in the last episode.
Right.
And I didn't realize in this time, like, that Princess Anne got married. She's got kids now, and now she's having, we'll get into it with her conversation with Elizabeth. But the fact that she's having all these problems, I'm just like, oh, there's a lot more story here that I feel like that we missed a little bit with Anne. For sure.
And we do, and this did actually happen. And by the way, for those of you who are historian buffs, Thatcher's son, Mark, he went missing. His car had gone missing during the Dakar Rally. I'm not sure how to say that. It's an annual off-road rally that runs from Paris, France, through the desert of Africa, ending in Dakar, Senegal. He was last seen in Algeria, and they hadn't been heard from in days. So that's what she is. And her son and daughter, they're twins. So this idea of even within twins, you're choosing one over another is a really interesting thing as well. Very much the Brady Bunch, Marsha, and Jan situation. Also, we're getting the background of the Falklands starting to happen here as well. We get a scene there where the Brits come on to some Argentinian territory, and then there's a confrontation leading to what will eventually become the Falklands War, and all of that starts to happen. So it's almost like they try to make it seem as if the situation with Mark, where he's lost and in a foreign country and all this kind of thing, and that they need to fight, marshal all their forces to take care of one of their own, is connected to the fact that that Margaret Thatcher wants to protect the British citizens there in Argentina and the Falkland Islands. That isn't how it happened, but they make it for artistic license connect, which I think works for the show overall, for the episode rather, overall. But these meetings with the kids, woohoo! The Prince Edward stuff about the bullying, but then his sense of entitlement, the fact that he turns in a classmate for getting caught when he had done the same kind of thing, speaks to so much privilege, because the reason he turned him in is because he got caught, whereas Edward, doing the same thing, didn't get caught. So somehow he's better than this guy who did get caught. Kind of crazy. And then Andrew flying in on the helicopter with all the audaciousness and celebratory nature and arrogance of himself, and then telling the Queen not to stop him from going to the front lines. A kind of, I don't know. And then also dating an actress who was involved in a semi-pornographic film at the time. Of course, this is before Fergie comes onto the scene, and then later with Charles and with Anne. And I think the scene with Anne is really, really powerful. Where the other 2 scenes with the boys, or the other 3 scenes with the guys, are just like, kind of funny to watch. I think the scene with Anne is devastating to watch, to see the situation. I mean, Anne is one of my quietly favorite people throughout the show so far. I've really enjoyed that character so much. Which one of these stood out for you of these meetings?
Well, all of them for different reasons. The Prince Edward one for me, I had a really hard time focusing on what was happening in the scene, because my sister pointed out while we were watching it that was the same actor who played, I think it was Claire's stepson in the show Fleabag.
Oh, right on.
Where his only line in the entire series is "Where's Claire?" And it's just it was so freaking funny. So I had a really hard time seeing past what was happening in that scene.
Okay.
But yeah, I do remember hearing that he was being bullied, which was kind of sad and alarming. I think for Liz to hear, and so she's trying to talk through some of that with him.
Yeah.
The Prince Andrew stuff was really interesting to me because he was so charming.
Yeah.
And I couldn't imagine. I'm just like, this must have been, I mean, this has to have been real, because just thinking about like where he is now in his situation, I'm just like, I think all of this really, it checks out for me.
Yeah.
I think that this lines up. But I almost wondered at the end of the episode, maybe if he was the favorite, if maybe it had come down to him. Because he did have that charm sort of going for him. But you're right. This conversation with Anne was so incredibly tragic. And I have to say, this actress who's playing Anne, I feel like of all of the actors in the show, she has the accent down so well.
Oh yeah.
I think she has it down the best. It seems to just like, it just falls off the tongue for her.
Yeah.
She's really killing it. It's really, really, really well done.
Erin Doherty.
Yeah. So the conversation between her and the Queen, it is really tragic. The fact that she takes the time to sit and kind of interview each of her children. This is the one that ends really sadly, I think.
Yeah.
It ends on a pretty quiet, somber note.
If I remember correctly, she sent away the man that she's been cheating on her husband with. That Elizabeth kind of moves him away from Anne, and Anne is almost devastated. Like, please don't do this to me. Please, it's the only thing I have that makes me happy. It's so funny that these kids are constantly cheating on their wives or on their significant others, and this is something that Elizabeth, from having watched the whole show every season, had to deal with Philip as well. And that comes up every once in a while. And of course, in the episode 1, when Charles goes back at Lord Mountbatten on the phone about how he has no place to be judging him, Lord Mountbatten and his wife Edwina had been cheating on him with a number of people. And then Lord Mountbatten found out, and they agreed to have an open marriage, in essence, separate beds, but stayed friends and stayed married together, but each had their own dalliances, each had their own. So certainly throughout this history of this royal family, there is quite a lot of philandering going on, whether they're in a relationship or married. So fascinating stuff going on here. What else to say about this episode? Anything else you want to drop in on this episode here, Laura?
Well, we did get little hints that Anne is pretty jealous of Diana.
Yes.
Especially in terms of how she's being treated by the paparazzi, which is fair. I'm sure that Anne hasn't been treated, she's been dealing with this her entire life. And it is probably old hat for her at this point, but to see Diana treated so differently than she was probably really heartbreaking. And so she brings up the fact that, she's always in the papers with her charities and all that. Which was sort of unfortunate. We see the confrontation with Margaret Thatcher and her daughter at the end, where the daughter basically acknowledges, like, we know that Mark's the favorite. So let's have a talk about that. I think that there are a couple of like examples of it throughout the episodes, but we see a lot of Margaret Thatcher doing a lot of like housework.
Yes.
Which just shocks me every time I see it. I'm like, what are you doing? Surely you can have people for this. Like, it was very interesting to see it. I mean, making her daughter like cook dinner for her cabinet at one point. I'm just like, get a cook. I promise it'll make your life easier. Get a cook and get someone who can do your ironing for you and everything about your life. Like, I think that I would think that would be something they would build into your budget. But it was interesting to see. I can also see why that character, who is all about the hustle and all about the work and all about the drive, would be resistant to something like that.
Yeah. Princess Laura Kelly over here. All right. Get a cook, get a maid. I get it.
I like to cook, but if I didn't and I was Margaret Thatcher, I would get a cook.
It's true. It's really a great moment to see her putting on the apron and like trying to open the can on stuff. It's just kind of mind blowing because you're like, you're the prime minister. There are certainly people to do this for you. Why are you doing this? But of course, this is just to solidify the scene between her and her daughter, where she confronts her about her being, selecting Mark over her, and it's very clear. And when Mark comes back, she dotes on him like crazy, which is insane to watch. But also we do discover, in my opinion, that Andrew is her favorite by the end of the episode. But the queen also says that all of her children are lost in different ways, and she tries to kind of brush off her mistakes in parenting, so to speak, by saying that she was busy mothering the country, so her children suffered in exchange. All right, let's move into our last episode here. We're running a little bit long on time, so let's jump into the last episode here, called Fagan, and of course that is for the name of the man who breaks into Buckingham Palace and has this 10-minute conversation with the Queen. This actually happened. This really did happen. He broke in once before and then broke in a second time and got to the Queen that time and was able to sit down with her and talk to her for like 10 minutes. Accounts vary. He's told different stories throughout the years. He's still alive. We find out by the end of the episode, he apparently survived a heart attack and COVID this year. This all really did happen. He did get convicted for stealing the wine, but then I think they gave him probation for that. But this was more to highlight what the policies of Margaret Thatcher were doing to the working class. One of the dings I will give this season is they don't get into the IRA stuff as deeply as I think they should have, and they don't get into the policies of Thatcher and how it affected a lot of the towns in England too deeply. They just mentioned the unemployment and mentioned the general feeling of the working class towards Thatcher. And there were a number of songs that were written about Thatcher's time and how much they hated her policies and how much it really affected the working class in such a negative way with unemployment. So Fagan is presented as a guy who has like lost his wife, who has gone off with another man and their kids. He is frustrated by it all. His journey throughout this episode is one of frustration. He eventually confronts the guy who is dating his wife in the schoolyard in front of his kids, and then is banned from seeing his kids completely. And after meeting with a representative of his who should be helping him, the representative kind of dismisses his claims and says, if you want to take it up with anybody, you can take it up with the Queen, which is, of course, what might have motivated him to climb the walls and go in and have this conversation with the Queen. And, Laura, this scene between them is fantastic, don't you think? Just an incredibly well-written scene. And both of these actors do such a phenomenal job in this scene.
They really do. I had to look up who this actor was because I was like, I know I've seen him before, and I think it was a couple episodes of Sherlock that he was in. But yeah, he was fantastic. Yeah. I really got such a thrill of watching him walk around the palace with no one noticing, no security guards, no maids, no nothing, him just ducking into corners and hiding. It was a really exciting episode to watch. It was almost like watching a little heist film within this episode. So I enjoyed it. I think it was a really great portrayal of, how the other side is dealing with all of Margaret Thatcher's policies, and the toll that it's taking on the working class. It was, it was nice to sort of see that point of view. At the same time, I noticed a couple times that Margaret Thatcher outfit repeats a few times in the show, which I think makes a lot of sense for her character. Yep. I appreciated that.
The blue dress
in this episode. Yeah. The unemployment office and jumping across from different, agency to agency to government agency, trying to figure out the solution to your problem. I'm like, ever called your phone company? It felt very familiar. That frustration. I can't imagine having to. You don't even have to do it over the phone. The poor guy's going through it in real life. And just seeing, the sort of history of how his life has fallen apart as a result of what's going on in the country was really tragic to see. But yeah, how he ended up in the Queen's bedroom was definitely an adventure. And then their conversation, I totally agree. Amazing acting from both actors in the scene. I really enjoyed how it played out, and I cannot believe that this is a true story that actually happened.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, and you can even find the Scotland Yard write-up on this, the official write-up that was done, the report that was done on this break-in July 9th, 1982. But he is begging her to stop Thatcher. And this leads to a confrontation at the end of the episode between Thatcher and Liz, as you're calling her, and Liz, where she says, if people like Mr. Fagan are struggling, do we not have a collective duty to help them? What of our moral economy? And Margaret Thatcher shoots back and says, if we are to turn this country around, we really must abandon outdated and misguided notions of collective duty. This is kind of this back and forth about who should be ruling, who should be dictating what we're doing here in the country at this time. And of course, the Falklands War finishes by this episode as well, which helps Margaret Thatcher to be elevated to another run as prime minister, another term as prime minister. And she even cuts the meeting short because she has to go to a rally to celebrate their victory in the Falklands War. Fascinating stuff. Fascinating stuff.
Liz is cringing at the idea of running off to the victory parade, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was one line that really stuck out to me for this Michael Fagan, who said that, they say that I'm mentally ill, but really I'm just poor. And I think that was such an interesting line for them to include. And I think that was a really great representation of what was happening at the time, which is so unfortunate. And then, having Thatcher run off to a victory parade after hearing that was just like, I remember like jaw drop watching that episode or watching the end of that episode. So we have a really cute moment with Philip at the end where he's like, I'm really sorry I wasn't there to protect you. I feel like I should have been there. That was kind of a sweet, quiet moment for them at the very end. And the epilogue, I'm glad that they included that, because I had a lot of questions at the end of that episode. And that was really nice that they added some context to that and basically were like, hey, just to be clear, I know this episode was crazy. This actually did happen.
Yeah, absolutely. He says that she ran off, and then eventually he had this conversation with her, or what have you, and they eventually kind of escorted him out. But he never served one day in jail for breaking into the palace. That's a fascinating thing. That's also a part of this story. From what I understand and what I've read, he never served one day in jail for breaking into the palace. They kind of understood that it was just a frustration from what was going on in the policies and everything and what have you. So it's a very smart, dramatic technique, dramatic technique that Peter Morgan uses here as to have Fagan symbolize what is happening in the country and what have you. So, all right, that's our spoiler review of the first 5 episodes of The Crown season 4. Laura, what are your overall feelings as we walk into episodes 6 through 10?
I'm really excited. I have to say, I think The Mandalorian has kind of changed things for me in terms of to binge or not to binge. I'm kind of enjoying taking my time a little bit with this season, and letting it play out, because it is a lot. It's a lot to look at. There's a lot of story. They're bringing in different historical components that they haven't brought in before. We're addressing things like what's happening with the working class, what's happening with the war, what's happening in the rest of the world. So it's a lot to take in. I'm enjoying sort of kind of the leisurely pace at which I'm watching it. So anyone who's ahead of me, I don't know what else is coming, so please don't spoil anything. But I am looking forward to finishing off the season, and then what's to come in seasons 5 and 6. Now, you did say that they're recasting after this season. They're not going to do.
Have you not heard of any of the recasting?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I've heard of anything about it.
Imelda Staunton will be playing the Queen. She will replace Olivia Colman. Let me see. I want to make sure I get everything right. Elizabeth Debicki will be coming in for Diana, Princess Diana. Let's see. Yeah, Imelda Staunton, as I said. Leslie Manville is coming in to replace Helena Bonham-Carter. Leslie Manville is a man you know from The Phantom Thread. Jonathan Pryce is going to be sitting in for. It's going to be Prince Philip. So Tobias Menzies gets moved off. Elizabeth Debicki stepping in to play Diana in season 5 lets you know that she is going to be a very, very central part of season 5, and the tragedy that happens to her, I'm sure, will be a part of it as well. So I say overall, love the first 5 episodes. All I can tell you about the next 5, which I've already watched, is get ready, because there is so much for you to enjoy here, Laura, and it gets deeper, and we get more with all of these characters that will have you vacillating in sympathy and derision for all of them as you go through the next 5 episodes. So get ready for that. All right, well, Laura, where can they find you and everything you got going on?
Sure. So John and I host the Jedi Way here on his channel. If you want to hear us talk about Star Wars, go check that out. I host a podcast called Force Toast, a Star Wars Happy Hour with my friend Alice, where we drink wine and talk about Star Wars. I compete in the movie Trivia Schmodown in the Star Wars division, and you can find me on Twitter at @shutup_Laura. Same handle on Instagram. How about you, John?
You can find me at The Rocha Says on Twitter and on Instagram. And thanks to all of you who took a chance to watch this review here or to listen to this review. Really appreciate it madly. Give it a like if you enjoyed what we had to talk about. And let us know in the comment section below what you thought about the first 5 episodes of The Crown and what you thought we got right or didn't get right. And maybe some historical stuff you want to add to what we talked about as well. Let us know what you thought about all of it. And if you're enjoying the season and where you hope it goes in the next 5 episodes, would appreciate it. Please, no spoilers in the chat for the next 5 episodes. Really want people to enjoy this and kind of come back and watch our reviews and not get anything spoiled that is coming up in the rest of the season. Please remember to subscribe to the channel as well. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell so you know all the content that's coming out, and share this review with everyone on your social media, because if your friends and family appreciate your point of view and trust your judgment, that means they'll take a chance on something like this and maybe come aboard the Outlaw Nation train as well. All right, thanks everybody. We'll talk to you next time with another brand new review here of The Crown, episodes 6 through 10, very soon here on the Outlaw Nation channel. Take care until then.